Good morning. My name is Daniela Sanchez, and I'm a sophomore in the college studying government and Latin American history. I have been involved with geopolitics since my first week at Georgetown as a participant in the Campaign Bootcamp pre-orientation program, and I became the program director for the program this year. I am privileged to introduce Senator Cory Booker. Raised in Harrington Park, New Jersey, Senator Booker attended Stanford University, where he received his bachelor's degree in political science and master's in sociology. He completed his education at Yale University, where he obtained his law degree. Before his election to the United States Senate in 2013, Senator Booker served in Newark as a member of the City Council, as well as mayor. Currently, Senator Booker serves on Senate committees on foreign relations, judiciary, small business, and environment and public works. Please join me in welcoming Senator Cory Booker to the stage.
Thank you very much. Hey, how you doing, Chris?
Good, how are you?
Good to see you, man.
Good to see you too.
All right. Hello, everybody. Hello.
How are you, Senator?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
Good to have you here.
I told Allie on the way out, he was just afraid of me. He couldn't face me on the stage. He turned it over to you.
Allie's afraid of no one.
Yeah, no, he's not.
Let's start with what I've sort of been starting all these questions with, which is just talk me through when you realized, how you came to realize just exactly the scope and urgency of this problem.
So, look, I came to this issue. I had friends of mine that were conscious of this in the early 90s when I was in college. But I have to say, when I got to Newark, New Jersey, out of Yale Law School, I decided to move into a tough inner city neighborhood. And I began to immediately understand that although there were issues of a mass incarceration force going on, there were issues of horrible housing and slumlords, I immediately began to realize that there were so many toxic health issues going on in Newark, and that environmental justice was one of the biggest crises in my community. And I began to understand the link between environmental injustice and the larger climate change problem. That this wasn't about polar bears and ice caps, it was about vulnerable populations and my neighborhood. And we know that when the temperatures go up, it aggravates problems that are disproportionately impacting vulnerable communities. For example, asthma already is the #1 reason why children miss school in America, a health reason. But in urban communities, our asthma rates are multiple times higher than suburban areas. And when you have heat and temperatures go up, cities are heat islands. You start to see many issues, from more asthma attacks, respiratory problems. And so for me, I come at this through an environmental justice lens. That's why I'm one of the small handful of presidential candidates that have as a major pillar of their climate plan to be issues of environmental justice. And I see this as an issue not in the future. I see this as a problem right now. We have about $100 billion a year we're spending on the health costs today of the issues with climate change. And so this to me became an urgency right away. As a mayor of the city of Newark, one of the best things to ask about what kind of president you're going to be is, what have you been doing about this issue in the years leading up? When I was mayor of the city of Newark, we had another president like this one that refused to join an international community dealing with the problem. Then it was the Kyoto Accords, and Bush wouldn't join. But me and a number of other mayors in America said, okay, we are responsible for the majority of the carbon footprint of this country. And there was a big coalition of mayors that formed to deal with the issue. And I turned to my city and said, everything we do in Newark will now be done through a green lens. And so whether that was our job training programs to environmentally retrofit buildings, lower our energy costs, create jobs, apprenticeship programs for our youth, or even our reentry programs. We put men and women to work on urban farms, dealing with heat island, creating food in food deserts. We began to understand that if we looked at the world through a green lens, not only could we deal with some of the problems of our heat island and climate, but we can actually seize opportunities and have win-wins, lower taxpayer expenses, expand job opportunities. So that's what drives me. I'm the only person in this race, the only person in the United States Senate that lives in a black and brown community below the poverty line. And we don't mistake wealth with worth in my community. We understand that we have agency and power. But I wake up every day, as I did this morning in Newark, New Jersey, when I'm home, and I see the immediacy of so many problems, and that drives me.
What is your understanding of what the latest IPCC report and the timeline means? And by that I mean, what happens if we overshoot it? How feasible is getting to, say, net zero by mid-century?
Look, American history is a perpetual testimony to the achievement of the impossible. I really don't think that these ambitious goals that many people say, oh, we can't do that. Well, those are the kind of people that said, oh, we can't put a human being on the moon. Those are the kind of people, when we were demanding to desegregate this country, as people, governors, people in power positions said, you can't do that, segregation now, segregation forever. We have shown consistently our ability to do impossible things. And a lot of this discussion we're having with incredible candidates, by the way, and many of them are some of my closest friends in politics, it is not just our plan. There's a larger, I would say almost spiritual element to this, is can we create the conditions? Because it took a level of activism before we passed civil rights legislation. One was a necessary precondition for the other. Activism, demonstrations, an engaged level of citizenry that expanded the moral imagination of this country about what was not just possible, what was urgent. And so this is about a leadership that can expand that moral imagination, leaders, I should say, that can really call to the consciousness of this nation and this world to understand that this is the moral moment now.
It's funny, I've heard you talk about this before, and I've heard other politicians. There's this sort of a famous story about FDR meeting with, I think it was labor leaders, and he said,
I know the story.
Right, so I don't even actually,
say it, because I think it's actually a really important moment.
It's contested whether it happened, but basically a bunch of labor leaders wanted him to deliver something. He said, I agree with you, now go out and make me do it, right? So the idea is that people on the outside force politicians' actions. And I think we've seen that dynamic with the Sunrise activists and many of the climate strike movement that's happening today. But I always wonder, do you actually like having people yell at you and criticize you? And I'm serious, because psychologically and emotionally, you may understand the dynamics at some level that it's necessary, but people being like, you're failing, which is true. The United States Congress is failing as a whole. The Senate body you sit in is failing. What is your reaction to that?
Well, first of all, I don't, the construction of the FDR story is one that I don't like, because there was a disingenuousness in it. I really believe this, but make me do it. I watched with anger that my party, the Democratic Party leadership, wasn't for marriage equality. I'm a mayor of my city. I just get elected mayor of my city, and people are castigating the then mayor of San Francisco for doing what was the right thing, issuing a marriage license, now the governor of the state. And I still remember as mayor, I'm like, I don't care about the politics. It's the right thing to do. And the second flag I raised when I was mayor of the city of Newark was the pride flag. And I got an avalanche of anger, not on hate calls, but not anonymous ones, people telling me, I will never support you again. I'll never let you back in my house of worship, and so on and so forth. So look, we need leaders that are unafraid to tell the truth and take the consequences. And this is really one of those moments. History will judge us. Where did you stand when the planet was in peril? Did you stand for convenience? Did you equivocate? Did you triangulate? Or did you do something bold and say what we need to be done? And so I hear this from people saying to me in this presidential campaign, well, don't say X because it's too far and you won't be able to win a general election or something like that. Hogwash. This election should be a referendum, not on one guy in one office. This is a referendum on us, on who we are and who we must be to each other. And I think we should be putting plain before the American people the truth of what needs to be done. Politicians shouldn't follow national consensus. Leaders help to mold the national consensus.
So on that score, I think you've written in your climate plan that and I've been asking this question, whether it's an issue or the issue. And I think you've written actually in your climate plan that is the issue. Is it, yes or no, is it the number one domestic priority for you?
Well, the way I put it to you earlier as a mayor is the same way I'll put it as a president. Everything we do must be done through the lens of the climate crisis.
So what does that mean as president?
That means that, let's talk about things that aren't normally talked about. Because a lot of our plans mirror each other, have similar issues.
There's certain mechanisms that are...
Yeah, they're levers to pull. Putting a price on carbon, banning fossil fuel extraction on federal lands.
Which you support.
I 100% support. But what I mean by a lens of everything, and I learned this when I was mayor, is there's things we don't talk about, like procurement. I was so upset. I'm an animal welfare guy, and I remember going to the then secretary of one of Obama's cabinet members and saying, we got to ban this cruel practice that was being done with the treatment of animals, putting antibiotics into animals like we do. And they said, okay, Cory, we can fight this battle, but it's going to be really hard. But if industry leads, we're going to be able to get it done much quicker. And I was so upset. But then Walmart comes out and changes it and forces everybody that sources Walmart to change. So suddenly Tyson's Chickens and others. I use that example because one of the biggest businesses on the planet is American government.
Particularly the Department of Defense.
Particularly the Department of Defense. So imagine if I go in and, as president, as I will, and say, every person contracting with, in order to win a bid, you must change your policies. That is an incredible lever. The way you write bid specifications, I found this out as mayor, can dramatically affect what the business community does. And so there are things that we need to be thinking about. If everything is done through a climate lens, every single department and agency under my leadership as president has to have an aggressive climate plan, and that's going to force change. And so I look at these must-pass bills that pass through Washington. You know that word, that when they say this is it's a spending bill that must pass.
You guys are about to have another one.
Exactly. And so there are must-pass bills like the agriculture bill, which drives me nuts. I got to the Senate, I had a big afro, I've pulled out all my hair. I'm looking at the ag bill, because again, as an animal guy, as an environmental justice guy, the ag bill is so frustrating to me. But it's a must-pass bill, you hear. And there are things we can do dramatically through our ag bill to incentivize, to help farmers. In the same way you see farmers, as I drive through Iowa, see windmills now all over the place, that is a boon and a benefit to struggling independent family farmers. We could be incentivizing so much more of these practices.
So if that's the case now, even as you serve in the United States Senate, right, not as president, why isn't that getting done?
Well, first of all, some of it is. And, I'm one of these folks that just released a bill, and I'm putting a lot of pressure in the Senate because I know that our ag policies, you want to talk about big lobbies in Washington? We know about pharma, we know about Wall Street. This is one of the reasons why I do not take corporate money, do not take lobbyist money. But one of the biggest lobbying group is Big Food. Yeah. And they're incentivizing things that make absurdities in my community, with my kids going to a bodega and a apple is more expensive than like a Twinkie product. These are absurdities that we are incentivizing through what we do with our tax dollars. And so I pushing bills right now that I know are beginning to change it, because I see incredible progressive leaders like Debbie Stabenow who are open to these ideas about, hey, let's incentivize things like cover crops that pull carbon out of the air. It's not just, this crisis is not just about stopping more carbon going into the air. Right. We need to think of all these new technologies that could pull carbon out and use our ag bill to incentivize that behavior.
So you just talked about some of the things you could do sort of from the executive, right? And there's your plan is divided in some ways between the sort of big plan that would be legislative and things you could do to the executive. Do you envision, if Cory Booker were elected president and you had unified Democratic control, that the first piece of domestic legislation would be essentially a Green New Deal type climate plan?
Well, I don't think, first of all, I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time.
See, everyone says that, but
is that the metaphor that they use as well?
Yes, actually. It's convenient because if I were sitting
I've got to think of a new metaphor.
If I were sitting where you were sitting, I would say the same thing. But prioritization is by definition zero sum. Something goes first and something goes second. It is ordinal inescapably. Yeah, but look, and we have watched.
But this is me. You're talking to a guy actually who had to run a big city, New Jersey's biggest city. And if you ask me, what did you do on day one? I was tired. My left hand was so tired. I'm a lefty, right-left-handed, and I got into, you can't tell me when I was mayor of the city of New York, what did you do first? Deal with the massive spiking violent crime in your city, or did you deal with the challenges that you were facing in unemployment in your city? We went full bore right away. I was sleeping very little in my first months as an executive because I'm sorry, there are so many urgent issues. And as a guy, again, who lives close to that urgency, who has people on my block, who have kids that are poisoned by lead, who has a neighborhood where you hear shootings, who has folks across the street in a drug treatment center that are a testimony to the broken criminal justice system that treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. Where there are thousands of people in jail right now that we fundamentally, factually could say they do not belong in prison, that I could liberate with a stroke of my pen, I am going to do a lot on my first day. And I know people want to hear your list of priorities. I have already said this is an existential threat to humanity. There is a global extinction going on right now. More than 50% of all our biomass, living creatures, have disappeared in my lifetime. There was an article this week about billions of American birds in North America disappearing. So everything that I do will be focused through that lens. But at the same time, in communities like mine, these are life or death issues. Healthcare, shootings, broken criminal justice system, the fact that people in my community work full-time jobs, longer hours than my parents, and they can't afford to live in cities because of gentrification, because of a housing crisis in this country. So I will live life with a sense of urgency. I had a fellow mayor, when I was mayor, the older mayor, Rendell and Bloomberg and these other guys were really helpful to me. And Bloomberg sent this clock to me, a countdown clock.
Yeah,
Bloomberg gave me two things that were great in my life. First of all, he gave me the best political advice I've ever gotten. Before you become a mayor, become a billionaire. It's a lot easier. And I didn't follow that one, but he gave me this countdown clock, which started counting down the days I had as mayor. And he said, do not count the days, make each one count. And that clock sat to me every second of every day. I knew the urgencies as a guy who was chosen with his life to stay in a community of struggle. And as President of the United States, every second that this nation gives me to have the most sacred honor I could imagine is to lead, will be spent dealing with the urgencies. And you've heard me say this before. I worry about the impotency of empathy, because I'm here because of a courageous empathy, because people who didn't look like me or pray like me in my childhood, in the 60s leading up to my birth, saw that the crises facing African Americans, the injustices facing them, were injustices facing them and their families, and joined together like Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner, black and white, Christian, Jewish, who were willing to die, give their lives for this country to advance civil rights and voting rights. That is what I was raised with. It was my breakfast, sitting around a table with parents who never stopped telling me the wretchedness, the injustices in this country. It was tough stuff, but they always told that in the context that this nation has never been defined by bigotry, hatred, inequality. It's been defined by how people have dealt with that. And so for me, when I see, when you have to talk to a parent who's had their child, their brain addled by lead, which is permanent damage, who has struggled all their lives to do everything right, and then an environmental issue. Remember, there are thousands of cities in America. There are 3,000 jurisdictions, in fact, where children have more than twice the blood lead levels of Flint, Michigan. And we don't have the urgency as a country to make the one-time infrastructure investment to get rid of all those pipes. That's why a big pillar of my climate change is dealing with the injustices now. I live with that sense of urgency, the haunting reality of hundreds and hundreds of conversations with people who are experiencing injustice in this country that is unacceptable in a nation this great, this strong, this wealthy.
So one of the things that you have in the climate plan is you sort of married together some of those mechanisms that we talk about. There's a fee and dividend, there's some executive actions, rejoining Paris, things like that, with things specifically targeted to environmental justice, which aren't necessarily about the carbon in the atmosphere. So,
but they're interrelated.
The Superfund sites, there are Superfund sites that have been essentially abandoned. There's, I think, some lead abatement as well. So, if someone says to you, look, climate is existential, like, how do you see the relationship between those two when you're talking about things that are absolutely 100% necessary, urgent, next to the carbon issue?
Because we have to begin to understand in this country that there is an interwoven interconnectedness between all the issues we care about. And this is why I keep coming back to food systems. Because I have this incredible front row to debates and discussions now. The privilege of being a presidential candidate means you should seize every opportunity to affect the national conversation. And so I listen to these healthcare debates, waiting for your guys' nationally televised debates. Okay, let's cover healthcare. 1 minute, go. And I wait for the opportunity to try to press points like this, that there is no difference between the urgency of making sure every American has healthcare to actually also dealing with the things that making healthcare necessary. Like, we are making ourselves sick as a country because we are subsidizing foods, giving tax breaks to major corporations to give us food that makes us sick. And this is related to environmental injustice, and it's related to climate because, hey, I'm not going to tell you not to eat bacon.
Right.
I'm a vegan, and what's the joke about vegans? How do you know somebody's a vegan? Don't worry, they'll tell you.
Right. You just did.
I did. You notice how I brought that up there. But let me give you this example, which if I could take everybody there, you would weep. It was uncontrollable to me to see this, because you go to places like Duplin County, North Carolina. There are more pigs in North Carolina than people in New Jersey, and they produce 10 times pigs, the excrement, than human beings do. And these massive factory farms, like the American farming culture has changed dramatically by the corporatization, massive factory farms. By the way, farmers are now treated almost like sharecroppers. They're massively in debt. They're being controlled by big multinational corporations like Smithfield, and under conditions that are so inhumane to these animals, and they cover them. They don't want anybody to see. They put on their packaging happy pictures of pigs, but it is misery. And then they don't know what to do with the effluent, so they put it into these massive lagoons, and then they spray it on spray fields. I've stood there and watched as some stuff drops down, but other stuff mists into communities. Now, where do you think they put these massive operations? Usually in low-income communities, in this case, African-American communities. And when you sit with human beings, fellow Americans, as I did, in a packed room, and they tell you we can't open our windows anymore, we can't put our clothing out, we can't run our air conditioning, the value of our land that we've been on generations, back to slavery, is now worthless. And they have respiratory diseases and cancers. A Vietnam veteran says to me, I went and fought for my country, I come home and I'm a prisoner now in my own home. And when those big lagoons now, that we have climate change happening and more storms coming, guess what happens when storms sweep through? They pull all of that literally stuff out, and it pollutes rivers and streams in that community. This is a urgent environmental justice issue. This is a health issue. This is a climate issue. All of these things are interrelated. And we are subsidizing this stuff through our ag policies.
So part of the reason we subsidize, right, is because of the political economy that you talked about,
yes.
Right? What is your understanding of, if you have to say, the political obstacle to climate change? I'm going to offer you two options.
Right.
The political obstacle to big change on climate change is mass opinion. That's option A. The political obstacle are essentially interests, fossil fuel interests. Which of those do you think it is?
Look, again, these are these hypothetical questions like, what's more important to you, your liver or your kidney? These are,
no, but I'm asking
these
you
are interrelated.
to diagram what you read as the politics. Why we have not acted for 30 years,
right.
40 years. Why haven't we, and what can you change and what needs to change to do it?
So fundamentally, and this is where when there's incredible activism, record turnouts in the 2018 elections, we get a whole new House of Representatives, and the first thing they choose to do is to attack what I call the corruption in the system. Our democracy is under attack by anti-democratic practices. People making it harder to vote, specifically trying to suppress the votes of young people, minorities. As North Carolina, a judge in North Carolina, a federal judge says, you're seeking to disenfranchise African Americans with surgical-like precision. You see a new era of a corruption of money in politics like I could have never imagined. And one of the reasons why I was the 5th senator to take the End Citizens United pledge is because I said I can't participate in a system that is so corrupting. And that's why I challenge, I hope we put pressure to get every single legislator in Congress to say enough. I will not take corporate money. I will not take federal lobbyist money, because we've got to end this system. And so for me, when I think about everything from doing what we need to do to take on the outrageousness of the price of pharmaceutical drugs, the outrageousness of the influence of corporate consolidation that's killing new business starts. We are killing entrepreneurialism in this country with massive corporate consolidation. All of these things, fundamental to that is energizing our democracy. Gerrymandering, voter suppression, big money in politics. So for me, a big priority is taking on those corrupting forces, because if we can't take on those, creating what I said, the conditions for changing in other areas, is just not going to happen.
Michael Bennet, when he was here yesterday, as a colleague of yours, obviously in the Senate, said that basically he thought that Donald Trump won the economic argument on this stuff about the threat to jobs and the threat to coal and things like that, right? And I think one of the designs of the Green New Deal is to turn that around. But how concerned are you about that argument, right? Which is, there's a lot of people working the oil fields in West Texas. There are people who work for natural gas companies. There are all sorts of folks whose livelihoods might be disrupted or even ended in their current form by the transition to net zero carbon emissions.
I think there has to be a just transition, as a lot of people are now saying. And I think that if you go to coal miners and basically say, your family, my ancestors were coal miners, your family, what you've been doing for generations, what's helped you to raise your kids, to carve from the earth through your labor, your American dream. And this country is now going to turn your back. When you, by the way, helped to fuel industry, light up people's lives, literally. And now we're going to turn your back on you? For shame. If I heard that and I was a coal mining family, yeah, I'm going to vote for the person that tells me I'm going to protect your jobs. And so the Democratic Party cannot look down upon any profession, anyone who's trying to do what they think is best for their family. What we need to be doing is show them a future that includes them and their family. That, hey, we need to urgently transition off of coal. And we will do that, but we have a plan to make sure that you will not have to lose your coal job and go to a minimum wage job where you're not going to be able to feed your family.
So here, I wonder, do you think there is political space there on that, in this respect? When Democrats took back the House, we saw a big spending bill. The sort of caps were finally off, the Budget Control Act and austerity, and you get the situation where everyone sort of agrees, like, well, you'll spend on your priorities, we'll spend on our priorities, we'll pass this thing. That goes away if a Democrat becomes president, doesn't it?
The sort of mutual agreement to spend on our priorities?
Yes. My point being that when if you want to say here's $100 billion for an environmental justice fund, and here's a $50 billion fund to help the coal miners, on the merits, you can imagine some political buy-in by Republicans, particularly who's going to be spent in their regions, right? But in actuality, aren't they going to fight that tooth and nail?
Well, first of all, you've triggered my frustration with the hypocrisy of the federal Republican Party, because when a Democrat's in office, all I hear is these deficit hawks come out of the woodwork, and then Trump gets elected, and we have now blown holes, unimaginably huge holes, trillions of dollars in debt that this generation and Generation Z is going to be. In fact, if we continue deficit growing like we are right now, interest on our debt alone is going to squeeze out our ability to pay on anything. And what frustrates me is that we now have.
Wait, but if that's true, that's in tension with spending at the level you need.
Two-term Democratic presidents,
Right.
Clinton and Obama. And I've seen now Republican presidents, Bush and Trump. We now know under Democratic presidents, deficits go down dramatically. Clinton wiped it out completely. Obama cut it in half. Republicans are the ones that are fiscally irresponsible. And so what I'm going to tell you as a guy, again, a lot of candidate choices here. I actually ran something with a massive structural budget deficit and a nation tumbling into a recession. And having people come to my office, every expert saying there is no way out. The jig's up. Declare your city bankruptcy. And I said, absolutely not. We are going to grow our way out by creating a huge boom in business in this city in a recession. And but we're going to do that. And so my climate plan actually will grow the economy. And in fact, if we do nothing by the end of this century, our economy, experts say, will shrink by 10%. The way out of this problem and to grow the economy and to deal with deficits is by investing in the things that grow the economy. The Republican plan has proven false time and time again. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice. Fool me 3 times. Fool me 10 times, which we've done. Shame on America for allowing Republicans to get in there and play the same. I was a kid in grade school listening to Republicans say, let's just give tax cuts to the wealthy, it's going to trickle down. Literally in grade school when Reagan was selling this voodoo economics. And we have seen this again and again and again to fail. But let's go back to other Republican presidents who actually weren't, Eisenhower understood this.
Right.
$1 trillion in today's dollar infrastructure investment.
Was that what it was in today's dollars?
In today's dollars, it was $1 trillion plan that grew this economy that we've been drafting off.
That's wild. I didn't know the number.
Yeah. That we've been drafting off of that infrastructure investment. It expanded the economy. It helped businesses. It was a multiplier effect. When I was mayor, I used to get tired of people coming to me with their strong opinions, but really not much to back it up. And I finally said, in God we trust, but everybody else bring me data. Show me the numbers, okay? And so I can show you the data that simply shows tax cuts to the rich, to the wealthiest of Americans who's had their fortunes triple in a span of a generation, while the rest of us have seen wages stagnant. And we know that doesn't trickle down.
So you would repeal the Trump tax cuts?
Oh my God, not just the Trump tax cuts.
Entirely?
No, actually I wouldn't do it entirely. I would do it massively, but there's certain things that I wouldn't change. Let's just talk about corporate taxes for a second.
And we're going to take student questions next, but go ahead.
The corporate tax sham that's been Now that's sometimes right for the small business in Newark, New Jersey that's paying full freight of what the corporate tax rate was. They did need a tax cut. But Chevron, Amazon, a lot of these massive corporations that were begging for the tax break, they didn't need a tax break. Their effective tax rate was lower than the competitive average in other countries. And so we basically gave this massive tax break for big corporations who now you said effectively zero. There are corporations that are paying effectively negative in taxes. The public taxpayers is giving them more money than they're paying. And that is a level of absurdity, especially when you compound that these are oil companies who are outsourcing their costs through their carbon emissions onto society. It's like the Agent Orange company in New Jersey, in Newark, that was outsourcing by dumping their Agent Orange in my river. They were stealing from the future in order to pad profits of today. That's what carbon producing company, that's what not putting a price on carbon is. I am a real believer in free markets, but I'm a believer in full cost economics, that the full cost for making this should be in the product. If it's not, that means we are privatizing profits and socializing the costs. And so when I tell you I want to have a fair tax system, I want to make sure that corporate taxes are fair taxes. That we're not killing a small business with taxes trying to start. Remember I said new business starts are down. I'm going to be the best president for small businesses. And by the way, the fastest growing segment of our society that are growing businesses are minority women. I want to see a huge boom in small businesses. I want to come out with a pretty big small business bill of rights. But these massive corporations right now that are taking advantage of American people and using their wonderful tax benefits from Donald Trump, not to create jobs, but to use them to gin up their stock prices.
Right.
Stock buybacks were illegal when I was a kid. And they're now doing it to gin up the price of their stocks. And a third of our stock market is owned by foreigners. Yeah. So we are giving foreigners a benefits to a small fragment of society, and it's costing us, because that infrastructure, China's built 18,000 miles of high-speed rail.
Right. And
in this country, the busiest rail corridor in North America that goes from DC to Boston runs half an hour slower than it did in the 1960s. So we took our inheritance. This is the shame of X-Gen generation. We inherited the #1 infrastructure on the planet Earth. This is data now. The World Economic Forum keeps indices of economies. We had the #1 infrastructure on planet Earth. We've trashed that house, the best house on the block, and we're about to hand it over to our kids with trillions of dollars of infrastructure deficit. And that is an environmental issue because high-speed rail, hello,
right.
Actually mass transit, these are all strategies that I will invest in as president that lower our carbon footprint, improve our economy, create jobs and opportunity.
I want to go to questions here, down here at the in the aisle.
Good morning, Senator Booker. My name is Sage
You can call
Johnson.
me Booker if you want. I mean,
My name is Sage Johnson, and I'm a freshman at Trinity Washington University studying international relations and political science.
And Sage is a very environmental, vegan-friendly name.
Yes. That actually fits with my question.
All
so
right.
Like you, I am a vegan. And
You told us too.
Yes, the joke is true. So as vegans, our carbon footprints are reduced by 73%, our methane footprints are reduced dramatically, and our water footprints are reduced by 220,000 gallons of water annually. Along with vegans, there are many other families and businesses across our country dedicated to green living. My question for you is, would you incentivize those who significantly reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and commit to reducing their waste through tax breaks? Also, would you consider creating a higher tax for products that have large carbon footprints, such as beef and single-use products?
That is a great question, and your footprint's bigger than mine, man. I want you to know that. And that's not just because I've got size 14 feet. It's because you like your bacon, don't you?
I am a guilty meat eater.
Yes. And this dynamic right here is like no American wants government to tell you what to eat.
I was surprised in your climate plan that you were mandating everyone be vegan.
No, okay.
I thought that was an interesting.
There have literally been articles
politically
from the right.
That seems difficult.
There's literally articles on the right. Cory Booker and his radical vegan agenda. I do not have a radical vegan agenda because I don't believe government should be telling people what to eat. But I do believe that we should make it plain because Americans are responsible if they know the truth about the impacts that the choices we make. Consumers when they have information, consumers tend to make better choices for them and their families. And this is everything. Fast fashion in this country, $5 t-shirts, and a lot of it has a real impact on our environment, on labor, on more. I've been one of these big people just wanting to wake up this country on the chemicals that we use. I've been fighting to change chemical laws in this country because we're the strange nation that has put a chemical out in market, put it on consumer goods, it's innocent until proven guilty. So what I just believe is making as much information plain. And the other thing I believe in, what your question sort of gets at, Sage, is I don't want corporations to be subsidized to do things that are harming people. So yeah, there are perverse incentives that are being given to industries that should not be given. And I want to do everything as President of the United States to fight for environmental justice. And that's why communities like Duplin County or St. James Parish, which if you just Google Cancer Alley, imagine living in a place where chemical companies are so polluting your air and you have such cancer clusters that they call you Cancer Alley. I want to give local communities legal power to begin to sue and fight back on these corporations. I met with a Republican farmer because independent family farmers, these incredible folks, they are under attack right now by corporate factory farming that we are incentivizing through our tax dollars. This Republican farmer walks me around and shows me his cattle and his cows, and I was making all the dad jokes I had available to me. Like, this is utterly amazing. And I'm gonna I milked every joke I could for everything I had. And he was complaining to me about the corporate factory farm and the CAFO that opened up concentrated animal feeding operation, and that he couldn't fish from his creek anymore. And that his well water that his family had drank from for generations was now being poisoned. So I'm going to hold polluters accountable, and I'm going to stop incentivizing the things that don't support us. But as an American, eat what you want. But I'm asking all of us, including myself, we all need to understand that voting doesn't happen every 2 years. It happens every moment of your life when you choose what to do with your dollars. Are you a conscious consumer? We all should be, whether it's our clothing, whether it's our food, whatever we choose, we are making a choice and endorsing practices. And the more conscious we can become, the more we can be participants in making sure that our planet, our fellow Americans, are living healthy and lives of high well-being.
We're going to go up to the balcony a little bit. The senator's request, you have to be a vegan to ask a question.
Sorry to disappoint you there, Senator, but
no
good morning.
worries. Would you come to a vegan meal at least in the White House?
Absolutely. All
right.
I love vegan food. I just have a little bit of trouble giving up meat every now and again.
No worries.
My name's Sam Ruddy. I'm a 3L at Georgetown Law. I'm also editor-in-chief of the Georgetown Environmental Law Review.
Oh, wow.
And my question for you is about executive authority. President Trump's environmental policy has largely consisted of rolling back environmental regulations that President Obama promulgated under existing legal authorities, Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, et cetera. So what would you do to ensure that future presidents don't have the ability to roll back progress that you make on climate change as president?
I really appreciate that question, and this is something, if you're running for president of the United States, you think about and you plan for. You know, my team and I are talking about what are the first, I'm not exaggerating this number, like 1,000 actions we can take in that first 24 or so hours to roll back things that this president has done. But I'm tired of seeing this sort of ping-ponging like we're seeing right now with fuel efficiency standards, and that has a disruption to industry that even makes them, corporations, complain. You literally see auto industry executives lobbying this administration to back off. So the question is really good, and there are complicated aspects of this where literally there are rule changes that Obama made a little bit later than the law that would allow, and you see this administration coming in and changing those rule changes. So a lot of this has to do with timing of executive actions and administrative actions. But the shortest way to put this, though, the biggest issue, umbrella into which this falls, means that we have to make a change legislatively on many of these issues, which is why I say over and over again, this election is not about one guy in one office. This election is about all of us. Democracy is a team sport. And if we don't understand that this election is about the Senate and the Senate seats from Georgia and North Carolina to Colorado and Arizona, we're missing the larger picture. If we don't understand, there are tens of thousands of drop-off voters. What do I mean? People that go and vote for president, and then as they start moving down the ballot, they just walk out and don't understand that the state legislative races, especially leading into the next census and redistricting, are wildly important in the shape of Congress. So if I'm going to be a person that, when I am the president of the United States, that really is pushing towards 2022, because that midterm election is perhaps going to be one of the most definitive elections that there is in terms of having the kind of majorities to get major climate policy done.
I want to go to a student at USC, Senator, you can see them over there.
A student at USC?
USC.
You mean the University of Southern California?
The University of Southern California.
Can I, yeah, Trojans, I'm sorry. First of all, when I played ball for Stanford, I scored a touchdown against you guys.
I've actually seen that video highlight.
You've seen the video highlight? The older I get, the better I was, by the way. All right, Trojans, my mom did go to USC, so I have to give you some love.
All right.
Hi, Hi, good morning, Senator. My name is Joan Miller. I am a doctoral candidate at USC. I study empathy as communication.
Wow.
My pronouns are she, her, hers. And yesterday we talked a lot about individual responsibility to change behavior like veganism, water waste, and plastic straw bans, all of which initiatives disproportionately affect disabled people and poor people. Besides a carbon tax and these individual responsibilities, how can we shift the responsibility to incentivize corporations and high waste industries to change their behavior around climate change?
First of all, thank you for that question. And your course of study on empathy is what I talk about a lot on the campaign trail, this idea of needing a more courageous empathy for one another. And I think it's something that's not talked about enough in politics. And at a time that we have a president that is demeaning, degrading, and dividing Americans, and we are falling deeper into tribalism where we hate each other just because of the party we vote for, I think what you're talking about is incredibly important. In terms of your specific question, look, I learned this as a mayor, that this world is more rationally economic than we care to talk about. That I see this, that corporations respond to tax incentives, to tax policy, and it is very important. And that's why I've already been discussing in my short time sitting in this chair that we need to change the incentive structure. And that means doing pretty significant things. I will roll back all of the tax breaks, all of them, for fossil fuel companies. I will begin to go after with an unapologetic determination corporate polluters. We've seen fines and criminal measures go way down under this president. And then I will create incentives, tax incentives, to corporations as well as zero emissions carbon companies to do the right thing. And then it's also about a corporate culture and what are we celebrating. I learned as mayor that public-private partnerships were really critical, and pulling corporations around the table to be at the table when decisions are made and how we're going to make actions. And I do believe that there's a lot of power in doing that as well. We have seen in this era of climate change some really incredible global corporations step up and say we're going to lead on this issue. And so creating that culture is really important as well. And as president, I'm going to take responsibility, not just for vilifying corporate practices, but celebrating and including and incentivizing them. Because my father's generation, corporate culture was very different. You didn't shut factories down necessarily. You had a responsibility you felt towards workers and towards communities and towards a lot of the things now that corporations seem to just gear themselves culturally and with incentives towards shareholders. That's their number one thing. That needs to change, and that's the kind of leader that I'll be, and the kind of change that I will drive.
All right, let's go right here in the aisle.
Senator, thank you for sharing your time with us this morning. My name is Duncan Barron. I'm a first-year graduate student at George Washington University. So, a contention made in the national dialogue concerning climate change is that it is minority communities that face the phenomena's greatest consequences. And among those minority groups is the disability community. It is estimated that roughly 20% of the US population identifies in some way as disabled, and they are markedly diverse. They span the spectrum of race, age, gender, and economic class. A recent UN study found that 72% of disabled people have no personal preparedness plan in the event of a disaster, and almost 80% wouldn't be able to evacuate effectively or without difficulty in the instance of a natural disaster. In short, most safety protocols are designed without disabled citizens in mind. What would your plan, if implemented, do in an effort to be more responsive to Americans in that disability community?
Thank you so much for your question. And again, as a person who had to be an executive to lead through crises, including environmental crises, when Hurricane Sandy came through my city, we lost lives. And a lot of them weren't in the immediate impact of the storm, it was in the crisis and the aftermath. And one of the things we had to do was to run around the city making rescues, because a lot of folks with disabilities who were on high levels in apartments without power were trapped and in crisis. And so the consciousness of your question is something I'm really grateful for. And so specifically to your question, as President of the United States, as someone with experience and an intimate understanding of your question, we have in every area of my policy a disability consciousness. Even the fact that we forget before there's even a crisis, we have a nation that doesn't even honor the work of a spouse who's taking care of someone with a special need, a child or a parent with Alzheimer's. We have to have in every area of our policy a far greater understanding of the wonder and diversity of ability within our country. And so my climate plan, it has allowances for that and a pillar of urgency within that as well. And specifically on disaster preparedness, we have a lot more to do as a country to begin to understand, even if we do everything right, we are going to see a period where climate crises are going to be hitting us, from flooding to fires to storms. And we have to have a comprehensive plan that deals with all Americans, particularly vulnerable populations, low-income populations, populations that of indigenous folks, rural poverty, but Americans living with disabilities are also included in that.
All right, next question.
Good morning, Senator. My name is Matthew. I'm a graduate student studying international security at School of Foreign Service. The U.S. military refers to climate change as a threat multiplier that'll increase the odds of disasters and mass migration as it exacerbates different forms of conflict. Given the president's wide latitude in conducting foreign policy, what would President Booker specifically do to help other countries and international organizations adapt to a more chaotic and uncertain world?
Well, this has been a president, as a guy who sits on the Foreign Relations Committee and travels the globe. This is a president that is doing the exact opposite of what your question rightfully indicates should be done. I mean, I still remember sitting with State Department officials who felt like they had to tell me in confidence the disastrous impact of pulling back diplomacy, pulling back foreign aid in areas where people who had left Syria were up along the Turkish border in horrific conditions, that we were pulling away money from situations like that. Not only was that causing humanitarian crises in their estimation, but it was also creating a situation more ripe for extremism and radicalization. When you read the military reports that you're referencing, it is stunning and it is scary that if we don't have a plan to deal with the impacts of climate, we will see disastrous impacts, from famines to migratory crises to increased opportunities for extremism. And so my administration is going to use every lever that we have, Matthew. I hear too many of us applauding candidates when they say they're going to rejoin the Paris Climate Accords. Dear God, that should be like the cost of entry into, it should be a badge of courage. We've got to use every other lever of foreign policy, and I will do that. And that means our foreign aid has to be about working with developing nations on having climate plans. That means actually investing more. It was this president's first Secretary of Defense said, if you are cutting diplomacy, buy me more bullets because we're going to need them. Well, I actually think it's diplomacy and humanitarian aid and interventions in crises, in humanitarian crises. I also think it's our alliances, because our military sees this as a massive foreign policy threat. And so our alliances, if they're about the common defense, the number one thing that's a threat, in my opinion, in the next 20 years, and military reports, is climate. And we need to be working with our military alliances to meet this. Everything that I'm going to do on the foreign policy and foreign affairs is going to be done with a sense of urgency about dealing with climate and climate change, and using every lever that I have, from trade deals all the way to the soft power. You see these pictures in the Oval Office of a president who is schmoozing with, God, he has a better relationship with dictators like Duterte and Putin than he does with allies like Macron and Merkel. I will be using my soft power in every single conversation or every single meeting to make sure that climate is always on the agenda of our discussions.
Hi, Senator Booker. My name is Lucy Chatfield. I'm a sophomore studying environmental biology. I'm 19 years old, and like so many people my age, I feel really visceral anxiety about climate change every day. And today, as we speak, millions of young people all around the world are taking to the streets and going on strike to demand climate action because we feel this incredible urgency. If we're going to have a livable future, we need a Green New Deal, and we need it as soon as possible. So my question is, how do you plan as president to deal with opposition from Republicans and from conservative Democrats? And would you consider supporting filibuster reform as a way to make the Green New Deal a reality?
Yeah, filibuster reform is on the table, and it must be. This is not some kind of sacrosanct element of our democracy. It wasn't envisioned by our founding fathers. But at the same time, I'm a guy that lives in a vulnerable community, and with Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, and Donald Trump, when they had a couple years of that, if there was no filibuster to protect vulnerable populations in my community from them ripping away health care and all the other plots and plans that they had, it scares me to get rid of the filibuster. But you're asking a question is what am I prepared to do? And I want to tell you, whatever it takes. You know, again, as a guy that had an impossible hands of cards given to me when I was mayor of the city of Newark, we were in financial freefall. We were in the middle of a recession. When the globe has a recession, inner cities like mine have depression-like circumstances. We had to find a way out of no way, and we did. And a lot of this has to do with taking on tough fights. There's a documentary that was nominated for an Oscar called Street Fight about me taking on tough fights in Newark, and it's the way I know. I have a reputation in Washington for finding common ground and getting big bipartisan things done. The only major big bipartisan bill under this president was the criminal justice reform bill that I led in the United States Senate on the Democratic side with a great senator named Dick Durbin. And so I'm going to do everything I can to find common ground, but we have to understand there are people that will resist us, and we have to bring a fight. We have to be willing. I grew up with parents who would quote people like Frederick Douglass. Power concedes nothing without a demand. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. And so nothing worthwhile is easy. Nothing worthwhile is easy. You have to sometimes take the fight. The very first protest in front of the White House was a young woman from New Jersey, led by a young woman from New Jersey, a suffragette named Alice Paul. She didn't wait for change. She came and fought for it. And if you think change comes from Washington, in 1920, we didn't get the women's right to vote because a bunch of men came together on the Senate floor and said, hey fellas, let's give those women a right to vote. Ready, break. No, we came because people like you're talking about that are out in streets today refused to wait for change. In life, we all have one choice to make over and over again. It is to either accept things as they are or take responsibility for changing them. As your president, I'm going to bring the fight. But I warn everybody right now, you will not hear this from candidates, but I'm going to tell you right now, I'm putting a warning label on my candidacy for president. If I am your president, I will ask more from you than any other president has ever asked of you in your lifetime. I won't ask you to pay more taxes. Most of Americans, through my RISE credit, 150 million will get a tax break. I'm not going to ask you to be embarrassed more when you turn on the TV and you hear presidents speak. But God bless America, I am going to ask you to serve more, to sacrifice more, to engage more. Because every period of change that I have read about in history books or witnessed in my lifetime has come about through activist citizenry. And what we are doing right now is not enough. Not enough to deal with the climate crisis, not enough to deal with the slaughter of Americans at rates that are greater than any war. In fact, all the wars combined, we haven't seen as many people die as have died during gun violence in the last 50 years. We need to do more to make sure that people in America aren't going bankrupt over their health care. I could go on and on and on. We need to get back to this understanding that patriotism in this country is patriotism is love of country, and you cannot love your country unless you love your fellow countrymen and women. And love is not a sentiment. It is not soft. Love is service. Love is sacrifice. Love is struggle. And we are here because of love. The people who stormed beaches in Normandy, Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner, or Alice Paul, that's love of country. And we've got to show that sense of urgency and love for fellow Americans, because if we don't, we will decline as a nation compared to other nations that are doing things that we used to lead on, whether it's building out infrastructure or taking care of children. This must be an era where we have a more radical love in this country, a more courageous empathy in this country, a more activist citizenry. If we do that, the problems people say are impossible now will become not only possible, but we will achieve them together.
Senator Cory Booker, thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
No, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Ali Velshi will be back with